Borderlands games are known for powerful weapons, huge damage, and the wild builds that the community comes up with. But one thing that gets a lot of hate from that same community are balance changes that reduce player damage, otherwise known as nerfs. Every Borderlands game has had them, but which nerfs were the craziest?
Number 10!
Starting at number 10 is the Loot Midget farm in Borderlands 2. On April 23rd of 2013, Gearbox pushed out a hotfix for Borderlands 2 that completely removed the legendary Loot Midgets from spawning inside the game. Now, this is a problem for a number of reasons. First, there is an achievement that you can only get by killing a legendary Loot Midget named Jimmy Jenkins. With no spawns, you obviously can't get him to appear to get that achievement, but more importantly for most players, this is one of the few reliable ways to farm for random legendary gear in the game. There are several items in Borderlands 2 that don't even have a dedicated drop source, and back then there was even more items that had no source, so having a way to farm some quality loot was crucial to the longevity of the game at that time. Gearbox reverted this change the very next day after the community raised their concerns. 6 years later, however, Gearbox once again killed an easy loot tink farm in Borderlands 3 on the Jacobs estate when the community discovered how easy it was to quickly get loot there. That nerf, however, was never reverted.
Now let's see number 9!
Coming into number 9, we have the birth of the hilarious buffed money shot nerf kunai meme. On August 29th, 2013, Gearbox originally nerfed the zero skill Death Blossom, popularly referred to as kunai, so you couldn't stack it to increase your damage on a single enemy. They eventually nerfed this change only to rechange it again on October 29th of 2015 after the release of the Handsome collection. Ultimately though, this nerf was valid since stacking Deathmark via kunai was not intended, and it was honestly pretty broken. But during the course of trying to fix kunai, they also messed it up at some point so that it no longer worked on multiple targets as well. They did get that sorted eventually, but a meme was born in the community as most players saw Salvador doing crazy unintentional damage, Krieg blood-sploding entire screens of enemies and nuking bosses, and several other broken skills and builds on other Vault Hunters, and it just felt like Zero is being unfairly targeted.
Let's go to number 8!
Sliding into number 8 is the Ion Cannon nerf in Borderlands 3. Now, this is kind of a minor one in the grand scheme of things, but I will explain why I think that this one belongs on the list. This launcher was one of the first big overpowered weapons found in DLC 1, the Moxie's Heist of the Handsome Jackpot DLC. Originally, you could shoot it quick, reload it fast, deal lots of damage in short succession. People were using this thing to just rush maps, killing everything in sight. But on January 16th, 2020, they changed this weapon to have a 5-second reload, and they altered the ammo consumption to 6 ammo per shot, and they absolutely killed this gun for most players. Since launcher ammo is already crazy expensive, rare to find in ammo chests, and has lower capacity than all the other ammo types. The Ion Cannon was still powerful, but just for that one shot. It made it a decent fight for your life tool, but other than that, it was gutted. This nerf is more interesting in the overall grand scheme of things when you consider how strong other launchers would become later in the game's life. The Hive got a huge buff later on, the Backburner and the Plague Bearer are just incredibly powerful right out the gate, and then ultimately they added in the Kick Charger launcher with Season Pass 2, and the Kick Charger is almost identical to the Ion Cannon for base damage, but with a slower fire rate. However, the Kick Charger doesn't consume 6 ammo per shot or take 5 seconds to reload.
Number 7!
At number 7, the flak nerfs in September and October of 2019, just after Borderlands 3 launched. Within days of launch, players had discovered just how strong flak was with Gorillas in the Mist and Leave No Trace. In the September 19th hotfix, they wrote, "Gorillas in the Mist bonuses greatly outweigh its penalty to the base skill. We don't want to remove the playstyle completely, but the overall damage output had to be slightly adjusted because it was outperforming other builds. Gorillas in the Mist duration was reduced from 8 seconds to 6 seconds. Gorillas in the Mist critical damage bonus was reduced from 50% to 25%. Then just weeks later on October 3rd, Gearbox hit flak mains again, this time by adding a 2-second delay on the internal timer of the Leave No Trace skill, keeping flak from regenerating ammo with crits, basically rendering that skill useless. However, a week later, Gearbox changed that timer to 0.3 seconds to make it much better balanced, but the damage was done and a large portion of the community was abandoning ship. Gearbox ultimately fixed the issues with flak, and that character can absolutely shred bosses and do all the content in the game now, but the perception of the early nerfs did a lot of damage.
And now for number 6.
Coming in at number 6, speaking of character nerfs, just like Flak, Moze was on the wrong end of a lot of early nerfs. In that first month, players discovered that Moze could essentially throw grenades forever, use those grenades to heal infinitely while also doing insane damage, and she could shoot the Butcher shotgun with laser accuracy for as long as she wanted. All these things ultimately led to our number 2 item on this list, but the immediate changes to Moze included adding a delay to means of destruction as a way to keep Moze from constantly having infinite grenades and ammo, or so they thought. Then they nerfed the Bloodletter class mod since it was, quote, creating some overwhelming synergies for Moze. Ultimately, Moze would get a massive buff later when the Bounty of Blood DLC dropped, but the player base had this perception of her and Flak being nerfed into oblivion from these few changes early on.
Number 5.
Coming in at number 5, the Evil Smasher glitch in Borderlands 2. If you were around back then you remember the joy of standing there reloading your Evil Smasher for 20 minutes straight to try and get that one crazy laggy reload explosion. You see, the Evil Smasher had a secret ability. On random reloads, it would increase your mag size and give a substantial damage boost. But somewhere along the way, players discovered that you could abuse this by swapping to another weapon during this animation. Basically, you would shoot and hit reload. While the reload animation was happening, you swap to another weapon and then back to Evil Smasher quickly. You do this until you get a reload that looked just like this. Extremely laggy and explosive. Then you immediately swap to the weapon that you want to apply the damage effect to while that laggy animation was still going. This led to the absolute destruction of every bit of content that was available in the game at that time. Hyperius, Pyro Pete, Veracitus, none of them had a chance. Now, the nerf to the Evil Smasher glitch happened right after April Fool's Day in 2013 and coincided with the release of the first Ultimate Upgrade Pack. So not only were players no longer able to cheese their way through everything, but the game just suddenly got harder too.
Number 4.
At number 4 is the Tediore nerf in Borderlands 3. Now this one to this day remains a massive head scratcher for me. You see, with the release of the Designer's Cut DLC and Season Pass 2, Gearbox introduced a new game mode called Arms Race. Basically a survival mode where you can't use your action skills or Guardian rank to just breeze your way through all the content. You had to rely on gun skill, survivability, and planning. Or if you got a Tediore in the starting chest, you just go right to the boss and kill him quick. So Gearbox pushed out an update on January 21st of 2021 that reduced the damage of thrown Tediore weapons with near full clips, while the damage with thrown weapons containing less than 3 ammo had been increased. Now, this has always been the gimmick of Tediore since Borderlands 2, where it introduced the throw it away to reload it mechanic. The more ammo left inside of a Tediore when you throw it, the more damage it should do, since you just threw away a bunch of ammo. But instead, they flipped that, trying to make the player use Tediore the same way they'd use a Dahl or a Jacobs, completely killing the gimmick of the weapon in the process. Now, we don't know for sure that this was in response to how easily players were defeating Arms Race with Tediore weapons, because at the same time, a speedrunner had also just set a world record for completing the Maliwan takedown, with a Tediore being the big damage weapon of that run. Maybe both of these things combined led to this, but it wasn't the best solution, and it absolutely killed the desire for most players to use Tediore weapons.
Number 3.
On to number 3, the red chest nerf in Borderlands 3. With the release of Borderlands 3, Gearbox seized on the gimmick of the main villains being streamers by introducing a cool feature that worked on the streaming platform Twitch. Basically, the streamer and the viewers linked their shift accounts to Twitch, and then you could see what gear and skill trees the streamer was using, and viewers could also give them moxtails as an in-game reward, which would give their characters boosts. Viewers could also become badasses in the game and have their name appear on the screen, and they can also win loot from red chests when the streamer opened them. Now, that last bit is crazy important here because a bunch of streamers saw how well audiences were reacting to getting free loot, so they would literally just farm vault bosses like Graveward over and over, then go into the vault, open the chest, and score loot for their audiences. The worst ones, though, completed the story and just backed up their save to the point where they were ready to open the Lilith chest in Sanctuary and would just repeatedly open that for viewers. Now, Gearbox obviously saw this as an abuse of the mechanic and added a 30-minute in-game timer to all red chests, meaning if you open up this chest on top of Ellie's garage, you couldn't just save quit and then come back and open it again for 30 minutes of in-game time. Now, the weird part is nobody seems to be able to pinpoint exactly when they made this change, as there's nothing in any hotfixes or patch notes that I could find about this. If you know, then let me know in the comment section down below. Now, the weird thing is that didn't truly solve the problem though, as most players would just instead jump from map to map, popping red chests for their viewers. To me, this wasn't really a problem that needed solved, and ultimately they completely undid things by introducing the Schluter artifact, allowing you to make every chest filled with legendary loot, but more on that in a moment.
Number 2.
Coming in at number 2 is the infamous October 17th, 2019 hotfix. This was the day that Gearbox nerfed a bunch of popular weapons. The Flacker was made to use all of its ammo with a single shot. Now, this was reverted 1 week later, just so you know. The Lyuda had been shooting an extra projectile, so they fixed that, but they also reduced its crit damage by 30%. And then they killed the Crossroad SMG by removing a projectile and lowering its accuracy. They dropped the Cutsman damage by 25%, and they absolutely gutted the damage of the Hex Grenade with a 70% damage nerf. On top of that, they messed up the Butcher's accuracy and recoil tremendously, requiring them to have to patch that thing later on as well. Now, a bunch of these nerfs were fixed later in the game's lifespan, but for many players, just 1 month into the game, having this many things altered so dramatically, fair or not, was just too much. I truly believe that this was the moment that ruined Borderlands 3 for a lot of players. The game was still laggy and buggy at this point. PC players were not happy about the Epic Games exclusivity, and dedicated farming sources were nearly non-existent. Plus, you had anointments, a new thing that was introduced with this game that people weren't used to, and all of a sudden everything is just harder to do. All of these things just amounted to a lot of angry fans feeling shafted. Luckily, Gearbox learned a lot from this, and they made Borderlands 3 an absolute banger in the end, but those early months after launch were disastrous.
Honorable mention.
Honorable mention goes to the Schluter nerf in Borderlands 3. Now, this artifact was introduced with the Director's Cut DLC as a reward for completing the vault card challenges. Originally, it had an astounding 100,000% legendary drop rate increase, which combined with the slaughter shaft led to the map being absolutely covered in legendary loot. Gearbox dialed this back real quick and changed that drop rate to just 1,000% ultimately, claiming that there was a typo. That's a pretty big typo. Even at the much lower percentage, you can still get tons of random world drops with this artifact equipped.
Number 1.
Finally, at number 1, the craziest nerf in the history of Borderlands is the Bee in the conference call nerf. On November 13th, 2012, Gearbox did the unthinkable in Borderlands 2. They nerfed the beloved Bee shield. They increased the recharge delay, reduced the amp damage, increased the recharge rate significantly, and in that same nerf, they also changed how amp damage worked with multiple projectile weapons like the conference call. Instead of each projectile receiving amp damage, the damage would now be divided among all the projectiles. This led to a lot of community outcry and backlash. The standard cries of "this is a PvE game, why nerf anything?" But those same people, myself included in that group by the way, did not realize that this nerf was actually the saving grace for Borderlands 2. Let me say that again. This nerf saved Borderlands 2. At that point in the game, we had only just gotten the Captain Scarlet DLC, the very first DLC, and everybody was using the Bee and conference call combo to melt all the raid bosses. This eliminated all balance and all challenge, and for a lot of us, the novelty was already starting to wear a little bit thin with this combo. Sure, it's fun to just stomp a boss sometimes, but imagine never having to work for anything. Everybody using the exact same busted combo on every character. Borderlands 2 without that nerf was destined to die within months. So even though I was absolutely one of those people who decried the nerfs back then, I've come to appreciate just how important some semblance of balance is, even in a PvE game. So what's your one nerf that you just cannot believe that they did inside of the Borderlands franchise? Let me know in the comment section down below. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more Borderlands news, top 10s, builds, gear guides, and more. Thank you guys for watching. Take care.